I'm one of 4, and my mum breastfed all of us actually, but she never spoke to me about like any difficulties. So when I was speaking to her before I had my first, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, breastfeeding's like easy. It was like the easy option for her. She was like, you know, it's easier, it's cheaper, you don't have to prepare bottles, you just feed baby wherever you are. But there was never like this kind of like the other side of it, which I discovered like after I had my eldest, and like the struggles that I had and that other women have. I think she just, I don't know if she was lucky or if she's just like blocked out maybe that it was hard. I don't know, because it was so long ago. But yeah, so I think for me, when I was pregnant with my eldest, I always just assumed that I would like give birth and just breastfeed and that would be it. With Luca, it was really difficult. It was really hard. And I think I just wasn't, I'd spent a lot of time mentally preparing for like the birth and informing myself about the birth and all of that. And then it's almost like I had this quite a positive experience but actually I say it was a very positive birth experience with him. And then he was here and I felt amazing. And then suddenly it was like I had this little baby and then I just had no idea like what was next. At the hospital, I stayed in the hospital a couple of days, and the midwives were great and came around and helped with latch him on. And then as soon as I got home, it was just completely, it was the opposite. I just couldn't. I was like, how did they do it? What am I meant to do? How am I meant to do this on my own? I just moved into an apartment on my own, and yeah, I didn't really have. I was like, who do I ask for help? Because I didn't know any of that. I hadn't been signposted to any of the things I know about now, and the kind of different organizations that work with breastfeeding. I hadn't actually heard of, so I didn't really know who I was meant to tell. I was just like, oh, I'm just gonna have to wait for the next midwife visit and ask, you know, for help there. So yeah, I found this first, I'd say it was about 4 or 5 weeks that I just like really like struggled with, just really kind of like tried to keep going. I found it really, well, painful is the word that comes to mind. I remember it just being like painful every time I was feeding. So it's kind of like the thing that I dreaded. And then at some point within those weeks, I did reach out to, I think it was the health visitor referred me to a lactation consultant. And so I went back to hospital and had a meeting with the lactation consultant. It was the same kind of thing. It was like she helped, and it was obviously there was something wrong with my attachment, and she helped me a lot. But then I went home and it's almost like I was fine whenever there was someone else there to help me, but as soon as I was on my own, I couldn't like recreate that moment. And then after about, I think it was about 5 weeks, suddenly it was like something just clicked with him, and it started to become easier and it started to become less painful. And I was like, okay, if we carry on, maybe it will just become this natural thing, which it did. It's almost like I accepted, like, oh, it's going to be painful for a bit, just go with it. And now I'm like, actually, it's not meant to be. If it's maybe painful when they first latch on, fine. But if it's painful throughout a feed, it's not. There's something wrong with the attachment and the latch. And I wasn't really aware of that the first time. I just thought it was kind of almost like it was meant to be, because once I started speaking to women, like lots of women have that issue that it's painful to feed. And so I just kind of thought it's just something you have to like soldier through and get through those painful weeks until it becomes less painful and then not painful. And this time I'm like, actually, no, it shouldn't really be painful. It can be quite a lonely thing, I think, like feeding at the beginning and not knowing where to ask for help or where to find the support. I've got to this point where I'll feed anywhere. And but I would rather, if I'm like in a cafe or something, I quite like a comfy, I tend to go to the cafes where I know there's like a sofa or like a nice seat to sit in. There's something nice about that. Like there's a nice local cafe that I go to that's got a nice sofa in a corner, and it's like this cozy little corner that's like a nice spot, and it's a big sofa, so I can go with Luca as well, and we just all kind of like cozy on the sofa. Yeah, I'm not really self-conscious feeding him. in public. If I ever felt so, I kind of have this thing, I'm like, you know, if it's not really anyone else's business, so if someone's offended by it, it's not I don't have to deal with it. I think it's very rare, you know, there's this fear, isn't there, that someone's going to say something horrible to you. But I think it's very rare that, I think it would be very rare for someone to come up to you. I've only ever had someone come up to me and say something nice. When you struggle at the beginning, you don't realize that there's lots of other mothers behind closed doors struggling, because what you see is when people, you know, I didn't feed in public until I could feed well, because I was like, I don't want to have all that struggle and like go through all that out in the open until I could actually feed Luca well. But you only really see that side of it when you're out and you see women feeding. It just looks natural and easy, and sometimes you don't even notice that a woman's feeding because it's so discreet. But when they're tiny and you have to have all these things around you and cushions and special positions and all that, you can't do that in public, so you don't see that side of it. But most of us go through some kind of, I think for very few women that just don't have a struggle or, you know, some kind of difficulty one way or another. And actually for me, yeah, with Luca, I think one of the only reasons I continued was because I had one conversation with a friend who'd had a baby 6 months before me and said, breastfeeding might be tricky for a few weeks, but if you stick with it, it gets easier. And it was just that one comment that stuck in my mind, because she was kind of the only person that had close to me that had been through that experience. And I think I was like, okay, maybe it's not going to be easy, and that's okay. Like, I think it was, yeah, just over 4. There was no kind of like, well, that's, I didn't even, because I sometimes see these posts of women and there's all these mixed feelings, I guess, when it ends. And for me, it's almost like I don't know exactly how old he was, because I don't remember the day. It was very uneventful. It was just, he was coming into bed in the morning, he'd climb into bed with me and have a little feed, and it would just be like maybe less than just a few minutes at the end, have a little feed, and that was it for the day. Wouldn't have it at night. And then next morning, and then just one day he just came in and had a little snuggle and didn't latch on, because he was at the age where he could just, you know, latch on himself. And it just stopped, because I'd been through stages where I wondered, like, oh, do I want to continue? I hesitated a few times about whether, you know, it went through, it was like kind of that twiddly phase, that was, yeah, hard, and then that would pass and I was like, okay, I'll just carry on. So in the end, yeah, I love the way it ended. I can look back and I'm just, yeah, I have no regrets about continuing. But I like to think that, yeah, he's got all these wonderful benefits from it. Like, in my heart, I think that it must be true that it's helped him.